When you look at equality, you look at indicators from public health to mental distress to addiction. Wealth distribution is the best way to encounter happiness satisfaction.
You're listening to Good is in the Details. I'm Gwendolyn Dolske.
I'm Rudy Salo.
And this is the podcast where we learn what we didn't know in the spirit of Socrates, all with the aim of a more knowledgeable life, a happy life. We're going to be talking about the self-help industry. What we're learning today is that a lot of this industry of self-help, first of all, it makes a lot of money, but it also presupposes a very narrow idea of what it means to do well. And so what we're learning today from Psychologist, Dr. Bruno. So Dr. Bruno has written a whole book on the industry. What I found really interesting is that both, you and I, Rudy, have enjoyed some of these books, like some of these tips and tricks to get more out of our day, to be productive. But we've kind of taken for granted the fact that these only work in the context that being productive is the best way to be human, or that, we've already got a baseline of wealth and health. And so we're able to do that. But this whole idea of just manifest, or you just have to want it, does nothing for somebody in abject poverty. If somebody's been the victim of a serious crime, if there is a structure where there is a lot of prejudice and it's very, very difficult to get ahead. So we're going to be unpacking that. What did you get out of this? Because like I said, you and I kind of like these tips and they're helpful, but what did you think about Dr. Bruno's take on it as an industry?
I like this take. I like it a lot. I like that he's studying the industry. It's nice to know that there's people out there watching the industry and writing about it and putting out tips about the industry. And I think what I liked about our episode was that we identified those who may be the most vulnerable in being taken advantage of. I think this episode and this discussion is very relevant for our philosophy podcast because it's practical, right? That's our selling point. We're learning, we're trying to teach through an interview format how to be critical and how to use critical thinking skills and how to develop them, ask the right questions. So I thought the great thing about this episode is we critically thought about the industry and we critically thought about who actually could benefit from some of these books and who's vulnerable and the dangers, right? I started going down my whole discussion during this episode and how people who could be very vulnerable in their lives, who are looking for a community, how they could be sucked up into something that might be seen as healthy or self-help to change their lives. And then because of their vulnerabilities, they may be sucked into something that's actually worse off for them. I think you can only get so much that you can out of these books, depending upon what your mental health is at the time when you're actually looking for this kind of guidance.
I mean, as far as just picking it apart critically, is that, okay, here is the problem, and then take a look at the solution. And he is taking a look at these proposed solutions, this industry, and saying like, wait, what is the credibility? What is the science behind it? And it's not really there. Or what are the assumptions? This has been an issue in philosophy from Aristotle to Bertrand Russell, this question of what is happiness. And it was so central that it's part of our own American documents, right? You have the right to pursue it. Philosophers and psychologists have tried to give us an understanding of what happiness means. And the way in which Dr. Bruno discusses the industry of self-help is that it's packaged a very narrow concept of happiness that really is fitting into a capitalist society. That doesn't mean that it's bad necessarily. We're not like anti-capitalism, but we're just saying that happiness is broader than how much money you make. And what is being sold is that you will feel better about yourself if you make X amount of dollars. You also, in terms of critical thinking, have to take a look at the credibility of the people who are selling it. This reminds me, there's, Scott Galloway, who's a well-known entrepreneur. He's an academic in finance, and he wrote a book that is for heterosexual men to kind of get men out of the slump that they're in, where they're falling behind in education, they're more lonely. We talked about this on like the whole red pill movement with Rafael Gomez, but Scott Galloway's background is in finance. And so some of the messaging, while some good advice for young men, like get off the couch, go get a job, stop blaming the world. These are not bad things of advice. It is missing an understanding of the ecosystem in which young men have fallen into, and that they have gravitated to this help, quote unquote, help online, which is to be dominant and to get six-pack abs success and to make lots and lots of money, and that women are the enemy. And so when young men are susceptible to that as the problem, then the solutions being offered are not going to be very helpful. And so that's just one thing that we see right now going around, where somebody is peddling some advice to get out of their slump. But I think Galloway is missing the bigger picture. And that's what Dr. Bruno's work is doing. He's like, we have to take a look at the bigger picture. You know, as a psychologist, he studied this as a PhD. We're going to learn about it, what to look out for, what are some ways for we can understand the broader picture when it comes to helping yourself. And part of it is really community-based. It's not just about the self. It's about going out and giving to your community, participating in your community, not retreating and coming up with a plan to make millions of dollars. We're still all for self-help, but we want to be cautious about the industry.
What do you think we're going to call this one, Gwen?
Self-help or helping the industry? What about that?
Oh, I don't know. I'm thinking, what about how to think critically about the self-help industry?
I love it.
We'll dive in. Bruno, as I said, that your book has articulated something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and that is the business of the self-help industry. But I'm reluctant because I don't want to poo-poo something that can really help people, and sometimes the advice seems genuinely good. But the fact that it is an industry is also really interesting. So as you've got your PhD in psychology and you've also studied sociology, I just want to ask, what brought you to want to examine the self-help industry in the first place?
Always talking to friends and colleagues, you hear about the new book, the new technique, the new thing's gonna change you. I had a very good friend who I reference in the introduction who says, self-help book. He's a bit old and say, I've been really reading those books all the way through it, and I'm still here, I'm still a bit lost, I'm still not sure. It's those kind of very simplistic narratives about behavior traits that's gonna change your life. But at the end, they don't. And then you feel empty. You feel like, is the problem me, not the system? So my critique really is a community psychology critique. It's a critique that we are looking into individuals trying to bounce back or be resilient. Meanwhile, the structures, the system, what they go through is not changing there. But they feel that pressure to change. And then all around them, they have this thing. You think positive. And then you start creating this toxic responsibility. Meanwhile, we're still thinking about things that really inherent to luck, to being happy to born in a place, to be happy to born in a family, to have all the social context that allows you to flourish. So flourish is not something that we can just go down and start building. Many, especially social scientists, will talk about the technology of the self. We are now this project, UI project, and you should be work on this project. Is this project getting better? Are you making sure you, as a self project, are becoming the ultimate thing that should be to become or be a human? Meanwhile, most of us, from psychologists to philosophers to social scientists, know there's not really a unified response to that. Therefore, my critique was say, there's a lot of folks out there buying books, buying workshops, and investing a lot of money trying to find the ultimate goal to become a very successful person, where those things are not well defined. And then it's a lot of resource that goes into it, a lot of energy goes into it. Meanwhile, we feel more empty without actual answers to a crisis that we all experience. That's the human condition.
Yeah. I mean, what I like about the way you articulated it is that it's so narrow. This industry is relying on a mentality and a disposition of success that we did not invent. So we're thrown into this world and we're all told we have to have this thing of success. Then all of these books are getting us toward there instead of enjoying our lives, instead of being human. And it's exhausting because everything about the self-help, those books only work in the context of the belief of hyperproductivity, always being happy and positive. And those things don't align with what it means to be human. We're not supposed to always be producing something. We're supposed to laugh. We're supposed to make a meal with our family. We're supposed to sleep. We're supposed to ponder existence, like just get lost on a walk. And then we can go and do something for work and we can be creative. But everything is about getting ahead. That's exhausting.
Yes, and it's also the oversimplification into, as you mentioned, the individualization of it. And it has a lot of ideological tools when it comes to self-help. If you really unpack, as I try to unpack self-help, you see new liberal ideas all the way through permeating the idea of the self-made person, the project. If you hustle, if you get another side job, you make it. And the definition of success, it varies. What means to be successful to me might change, might be very different to you. And sometimes the oversimplification psychological theories that we psychologists are debating about it, and we not offer any simplistic notions or views of it. For example, if you think about Maslow hierarchy of needs, you have the basic needs as you go along. Even there, to some extent, it's contested. What works in a context might not work in another context. For example, we talk about the basics. So if you have, shelter and food, that's the first step to be happy and well. So we talk about, for example, homelessness. Some people not have there. So will those kind of very simplest narrative work for very specific contexts who are really deemed by structural issues? So as you mentioned, it's the underlying, there's the commodification of hope, and somewhat we are trying to sell people hope. Can you buy it? Can you acquire here? There's a book, seminar, there's an influencer now. Influencers now giving philosophical narratives about human experience, where we, yourself, folks, as philosophers, know it's not quite like that. We ponder, we think, we are unsure, we make along as we walk this very weird path that is life existence. Therefore, to think about self-help often talks about turning into self-care, but ultimately make people feeling self-blame.
Yeah. The hierarchy of needs, you offered a counterexample of, I can't remember what it was, but it was people in a context, I wonder if it was war or something like that, where they did not have the baseline of the needs, and yet they were still able to experience some sort of happiness and love. That there were contexts in which that hierarchy of needs just didn't apply.
Yes, I was talking to a colleague who is a clinical psychologist talking, and she makes a good case for the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how there was actually, he took that from, I believe, I can double check that, but I think it was from indigenous tribe in North America. And then you see, try to develop a whole framework that we use in positive psychology and other forms of psychology today. What misses is the communal aspect, what Maslow was trying to convey, to say when he spent some time with this tribe in North America. So we take this and forget that actually the underlying cause, I think, is Isaac Proletinsky who's a community psychologist, talks about the idea of mattering. If you feel that you matter, and if you feel that you can change something, you're more likely to feel better, improved well-being. So basically, there's a lot from self-help to mutual help, to collective action that make us find some sort of meaning beyond the self.
And what I'd like to talk about, just for a brief moment with you academics, because remember, I approach everything from a historical perspective. And I'd almost like to ask our friend Bruno a little bit, if he doesn't mind, about the history of the self-help book. I would classify one as Think and Grow Rich. Are you familiar with that one, Bruno?
Yes.
I would say that is definitely one where I have read several times, and I have given it to several friends. I've gifted it. There is something about that book that I would say did change my life and did change thinking. I'm an anxious, if you haven't figured it out, I'm an anxious person by nature. And so it takes a lot of hard work to convert negative what ifs to positive what ifs. And I will say that book absolutely helped me. And then you have Dale Carnegie, and Think and Grow Rich almost, I think, ties a lot to Dale Carnegie. There's a lot of Carnegie history in that book. And then you have The Power of Positive Thinking. Those are like the three OGs, if you will, Bruno, of the self-help books. You think about it, right? Somebody like Dale Carnegie, who was very, very rich. Why would that dude who had so much money and so much power, why would that person write a self-help book other than to just tell people, hey, this is how I did it, and let me tell you some of the tips and pass that along? I bring the historical perspective up almost to be like, perhaps it was started by the rich and powerful because they were the most well-known names in the pre-internet, pre-social media days where there was legitimacy. Those people actually accomplished amazing things. Okay. But then those books were runaway hits. I don't think they've ever been out of print. And so now, with the proliferation of self-help, people are now trying to cash in. Am I within the realm of good summary of how I see the history of the self-help industry and where its roots started and where it has become today?
To some extent, there are a few books such as Main Searching for Meaning that I would say is another big, especially in the UK, I think worldwide. And then now you have things like Let Them. So you see those things evolving, as you mentioned. I think the first part of your question was, it helped me, Bruno. How dare you? It helped me. It helped other people. Now we get that. The tool is fine. It's a tool, okay? We're not questioning the tool. We're not questioning the person. What we question is the universalism of the problem, okay? So there are many things that help you, fantastic, but there are other things that might not help folks when you think about socioeconomic status, history. So if you think about history of misogyny, racism, cultural aspects where people actually feel that, it's to do with my lack of opportunities, might be to do with my surname instead of me try to work very hard. And then what I'm questioning, those books tend to have an underlying narrative. And that is, okay, that's a tool that can be applied, right? It becomes a way of self-blame tech, useful bits here and there. Brilliant. Keep the useful bits, those useful bits that works for you, being the ideology. By being the ideology, I mean, as you mentioned, they start somewhat very naively trying to support people, help people. And that's what we try to do as psychologists or working with communities, isn't it? That's the primary goal, what we try to do. However, is the idea that responsibilization that you feel about by buying those books or buying different version of the same narrative, reading those books without getting too much details about the authors, because I don't know about libel laws in America, but you see they are a watered down version of psychological theories, really. Not much in there. And what's useful, however, if you are going to get help, I would suggest, if you're going to get the individualized help, I'd rather you talk to a therapist, okay? I don't know how it works in America, for example, the UK, you try to go through the National Health Service, and you have there, talk to a therapist to help you within there. But the other things that besides that is really around the community, it's the sense of community, it's the well-being that we take from it. And if you think about the therapeutic relationship, when you talk to students on counseling or clinical psychology, we know what really works. A key part of it is the relationship between the client and the therapist. It's that relationship of being heard and questioned that is the primary cause of support when it comes to healing, because therapy is a healing process. My answer is not critique on the person using self-help, it's the system, how the system, the industry deploy there as a selling mechanism.
Okay, I see that. I like that, actually. You're right. It's interesting. I think I take the view that I think there's stages of the need of self-help. Like if you're debilitated and you cannot get out of bed because of depression or something like that, absolutely 100%, you need to go to talk to a clinician. Here in the United States, you can pick up your phone and find one right online. You do have to make sure that if you plan on running it through insurance, you got to make sure that your insurance covers it. But I think that getting to therapy is relatively easy, and there's free options as well. A lot of our universities out here do some free therapy session with students. Yes, if you're debilitated and you have suicidal thoughts, 100% got to talk to a specialist. But if you're not there, or if you went through that and you're making your own path, I guess I'm of the belief that there's nobody that can help you better than yourself. And shifting your mind and changing the way that you view things is the most important thing. Now, the danger there is what Gwen brought up, and we talk a lot about on this show, is the over dependence on positivity. You have to be happy. Everything has to be positive thinking. Just think positive and everything will be fine. You don't need to go to a doctor. You don't need to go check that out. You don't need to do X, Y, Z. Just think positive and everything will be great. Some people will take it a little bit further and just say, you don't need anything except for your relationship with God, and just think about God and God will take care of you. And there's dangers there in that extreme. But I do think that a good middle road is some kind of finding that book or finding that philosophy, finding that crutch. I don't mind using the word crutch that will A, get you through your day, B, get you towards your goals. And if it works for you, God bless you. I mean, and as long as you're not hurting anybody and you're not hurting yourself, like, I'll go for it. And I don't think anybody's arguing with that. It just all depends upon the stages of the healthiness of the individual's mind. What I hate is that, not hate, hate's a strong word, but those influencers who do try to sell and upsell, and then it starts to become a pyramid scheme, and then you become addicted. And then at that point, it's cult-like. Like literally, like I could see it as being just one step away from like being a cult. In your studies and in everything that you've done, is that kind of like once again, asking your opinion about the way I view things, which I know is strange, but is the danger of becoming a part of a cult a legitimate danger, or am I kind of exaggerating?
It's, I think it reflects the context, isn't it, in the system that we live under. So let's talk about influencers. So you see influencers be happy, only good vibes, all of that time. So you are, if you into social media, let's say, a social media that's, let's say, hypothetically, you are on Instagram, you bombarded with positive messages, and your life might not be at that current moment not be that great. But you seen everyone have a great time. And bear in mind, there is a very framed stage of someone's life, isn't there? They frame in there. Look, they're not talking about things that are going bad. It's all the positive aspects of their life, what they want to show and portray. So you look at it, I look at it and say, what am I missing? What I'm not doing? How can someone, do that constantly? So you start feeling that it's what's wrong with me. And then what those influencers are trying to do, it's hustling, isn't it? They're trying to create some extent more money and wealth. And then what you have a problem, I think I talk a little bit about, life coaches and things like that, is that they're not trained, are they? They don't really have the scrutiny, the supervision to deal with people when things go wrong. Because even with therapy, even with working communities, even with your bachelor, master's, PhD and experience, what do you do when things go wrong? So it's all this idea that we should be questioning is the idea of gurus, really. Do we need more gurus, self-help gurus? I think it's more be anti-guru and pro-people more than anything. So people should be really questioning their assumptions when they see someone doing something on the social media apps, or when they read the book, really think, okay, what's the point of this book? Pro bono, what's the benefit of this book here? Okay, you see books saying, buy this book, you're going to become a millionaire next week. And that doesn't happen, really. And you have people who are viscerally experiencing deprivation, who think, you know what, I'm going to buy the book because it might change my life. Well, and then they buy the book, their life hasn't changed. And then what? And they start to look and they self-blame, wasn't me really, wasn't it? I didn't do. So I would actually argue that is detrimental to their well-being, mental health, if anything.
I'm thinking about this, like, okay, so you mentioned in your book the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I had an experience like Rudy. The first chapter is focus on what you can control. And then when you zero in on that, then it gets larger. I only remember the first habit. That was the best one. So whenever I'm stressed out, I think about that. However, both Rudy and I, we have graduate degrees. We have a home. We have a partnership. We have friendships. So we have the space to sit down and be able to take in this advice because we've already established ourselves in some way. But then I think about somebody who, let's say, is the single mom who's doing 2 jobs. Or in the US lately, there's been a lot of layoffs, federal workers losing their job, and prices are going up. Everything is more expensive. That to turn to that person who doesn't know how they're going to feed their family and say, like, why didn't you just think about what you can control and focus on that? Or why don't you just be positive? This is an opportunity for you to make stuff. It would be so insensitive to not take into consideration and to not also be honest, like to the single mom who's doing 2 jobs and be like, that's hard. That's fucking hard. And I'm sorry because you are doing all of this layers of stress, and to just acknowledge that that is hard. Or somebody who just got laid off their job, and to just acknowledge that really sucks. That's awful. Let's go and get a tub of ice cream and watch some shitty movies. And then tomorrow we're going to figure out, let's sit with how much that sucks. And instead of just saying, get back out there, like, you're not allowed to be sad. You're not allowed to acknowledge that this feels unfair and shitty right now. When I think about that first habit of the 7 habits of highly effective people, it does help me. What Rudy said, like it does help me, but I have to take into consideration that I am in this space, the financial and friendship security to be able to do that.
Yes, and I think you started the first point there was about skepticism, control the controllables. That's nothing new. That's been there for ages. Skeptics been talking about that for ages. You're a philosopher academic, so you know that much better than I do. But it's the way they sell it. If it's something new, grand discovery, buy, you're gonna be better. Control the controllables. It's something that skeptics have been talking about, philosophy talking about, and that's my problem. One of my problems sometimes is the idea that we trying to export, for example, Maslow, meditation. We export things from other cultures. There is for a specific context. It's a bit like a placebo, if you try to take some sort of one of those some sort of pills that doesn't have much effect, it's just a thing that doesn't work. That you apply here. Meditation, talk about meditation, you meditate and just observe, acceptance, commitment therapy, look at it, accept it, control the controllables. Yeah, all fine. I'm getting kicked out of my house tomorrow. I don't have money to the bills or the rent. My job made me redundant. Which book are going to help you with that? Okay, so this is, as you mentioned, is the idea. I can say, control the controllables, brilliant, but there's a sense of, specifically to my life currently, of privilege. Okay, so I can sit down, read the book, comfort in the world of my house, have a lovely cup of tea, and then make all of those, digest the context of, I need to do that. I need to have a growth mindset. So that's really the critique, that sometimes the context there is a lovely tool. I think we all somewhat use those tools. However, when we use those tools and look at ourselves all the time, we start to become tired. I think it's Woshu Hand who talks about the burnout society and talks about, the loss of meaning, the loss of connection, the loss of being always try to be happy, that creates more of the problem they try to ameliorate instead of trying to prevent that happening in the first place.
I don't know what you think about this, Rudy, but I was thinking that Bruno's book reminds me of the episode that we did about health influencers and wellness. And the reason is, something I hadn't considered is, why is it in the US that these health and fitness influencers are just skyrocketing in terms of, the economic boom, how profitable it is? And it's because many people do not want to go and see a physician, or they can't afford it. And then somebody comes along and says, hey, look, this supplement will cure all of your ailments. So the fact that healthcare is difficult to access leaves this vacuum for these health influencers. And I'm wondering if the same thing isn't true with mental health. Why take the time to find a therapist? Why take the time to pay for it when I could just get this book and everything will be okay? But then you read the book and things are not okay, and all of a sudden you feel worse because you just couldn't will it. You just couldn't manifest it quite right.
It's because of you. Well, no. The book
Wait, what do you mean? Because
formula.
me personally? Wait.
No. No,
because
the
of
answer
oneself.
when you go to the influencer, or you go to the person selling the snake oil, they say, "Oh, you just didn't do it right." The answer is in the book. It's you. The answer is you. You got to work harder. And maybe in a way, maybe they're right. Maybe everyone is looking for that quick fix. Maybe everyone is looking for that flip the switch and everything's going to be great. I buy the book, I'm done. That's it. I'm taking care of myself. Self-help. I'm going to read this book. I'm going to do one or two things, and then it's done. And that's impossible. Working on yourself is never ending. It's something that you have to do every single day. It's why you need X amount of hours of sleep. It's why you need X amount of hours of exercise. It's why you need to eat good food. It's why you need to be around positive people and away from negative influences. It's a daily thing that you need to do that no damn book is going to fix overnight. Self-help is deciding to be alive and trying to live a good life. There's no such thing as a quick fix. Mm-hmm. That's what I think. I don't know. Maybe that's, your summary was great, but I think my summary is great too. Hey, this is hard ass work. Yes, the United States, just our system, our health system, our hustle culture, our capitalist structure. We don't have the same safety nets like the UK. We don't have the same safety nets like Canada and other quote unquote first world countries. We also don't have some of the safety nets of quote unquote third world countries, where we don't have our families around, right? It takes a village. What village? There's no village anymore. It's you and that's it, right? It's you, your husband, and maybe you're lucky enough to live by your parents, or maybe your parents are lucky enough to sell their house and move to a house that's closer to you because you live in a place that's affordable. But that's not the vast majority of the United States.
That's the
It is.
American idea of independence, right? Like you kick
Right.
your kids out when they're 18 so
Right.
that they can, your job as a parent is done and you can kick them out. There is no sense of
That's
community.
gone.
And that would be
That's gone
very
now.
lonely.
It's gone now, right? A lot of kids are moving back home because
Yeah.
of quote unquote the
And they're
system.
shamed.
Yeah, they shouldn't be shamed. There's no way they should be shamed. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, if you're just at home, not trying to improve yourself, not trying to get a job, not trying to educate yourself, and you're reverting back to, it's even worse. It's almost like you're a 2-year-old all over again because you're not going to school. You're not doing something on a daily basis. You're just living there for free, right? It is about the individual. At the end of the day, if you want to better yourself, it is all about you. Sure, some systems are set up better, some systems are set up worse, but if you want to succeed, it all comes down to you. And I think that is the way in the United States, and that's just the way it is.
That's what I'm thinking about. Like with Bruno's book is that the idea of success or a good life, it's set up in a very narrow way. So we're not even talking about like enjoying our lives. The times when we're not being productive are just as valuable. That's not being discussed. And I don't know if this is part of the pop psychology phenomenon because I read the How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think I was in a kick at the time where I'm like, I want to be more successful. Years later, I encountered a book called Quiet by Susan McCain or Kane that was about introverts. That the whole idea of win friends and influence people, which is not a bad book or anything like that, it's just that it is for extroverts because we've associated success with the loudest, most engaging person. And then there's this whole culture of people who just, they don't have that in them. And it was really helpful for me to kind of understand because I can't go out there and be like the go-getter or anything like that. I am more quiet. That is just the way that I'm more reserved. I enjoy my alone time. I don't fit. But in the book Quiet, she talks about other ways. She talks about Robbins, about this, being very loud and even American evangelical churches, about how hard that can be for an introvert. To show your love of God, you've got to be loud. And so it never took into account people who have a disposition that are just as valuable, but they don't fit into that narrative that success and extroversion are intertwined. Or am I falling for pop psychology by talking about, hey, I feel understood when people talk about introverts?
I think you brought up a damn good point. Sorry. Go.
Yeah, I think it's a few points to unpick there, really. For example, we talk a lot about the attention economy now. Everything now is trying to take our attention. We don't have time to just be, to don't do anything. You have to be striving towards be the best version of yourself. What that means, I don't know what the best version of myself is to be like if I knew that. And then you start to live in a society that's totally fragmented. And we talk about, I'm currently writing another book that I talk about the fragmentation of society. We become fragmented. If you look, it's no way in the current global status of current status quo, you can feel happy. Okay, if you feel happy, it's something wrong. Okay, because where you look, things are a bit sketchy, aren't they? So it's fine to sit down. You know what? Things are a bit messed up, aren't they? And you don't need to feel happy. I think I remember I think you had that a song in America. I feel happy. And do you remember that song? And I talked to you. How dare you tell me to feel happy? I might not want to feel happy. I want to maybe change something. I might want to change the status quo. What I think self-help in pop psychology do to some extent is deflects people's attention from social change to get engaged in changing the conditions of oppression and liberate themselves from there. Okay, maybe that's not everyone's intention or capacity, fine, but deflects from there. It's a deflection tool from, I would say it's a deflection tool from new liberalism, really. That's what you're doing. And then when you talk about, I think you mentioned about, it takes a village to bring the child. You have other cultures who talk about that. I think you mentioned that in the book. For example, there's a thing called Ubuntu. I am because you are in some parts of the African continent. They talked about, we exist because of others. Another point is, if you want to know about happiness, if you really want to know about happiness, look at Finland. I think for 7-8 years in a row, Finnish, they come on top of the happiness index. And when you look underneath, I don't think many Finnish people out there who rely solely on self-help books. They rely on a strong social security. They rely on a strong sense of community. They try on things that's called SISU, the idea of a bounce back. So you have things there that make the finish the happiest people in the world constantly. So that's what perhaps should be looking at.
I mean, I was thinking about the lack of access to mental health and that this stuff is easier. I still am kind of blown away by the ubiquitousness of the law of attraction and manifesting. I hear so many people talk about this. Is there an explanation? Why do you think that it's such a phenomenon? Because, it's not nothing. The fact that so many people are drawn to it and speak in those terms is telling us that the demand is high. Where is that demand coming from? Why do people enjoy talking about manifesting or law of attraction? And is there any truth to it?
There are studies that talk about the placebo effect, expectation effect. I think there's a whole book called Expectation Effect. If you're more likely to expect something to happen, if you think about sport, especially people who are in high level performance sport, they expect to do something. So they get into the zone, they get into flow. So we know those techniques work to some extent.
Go Dodgers.
Yeah, exactly. So
That was exciting.
If you think about, that's what we call being in the zone, try to replicate that to some extent. So, the psychological tools that's going to help for you. For example, before you record, I think Rudy talked about acting, you have techniques that you do to prepare yourself for that. And that is fine. But what we're talking about here, it's self-help as industry. It's an industry because, you see from life coaches to influencers to another book. So in the UK, you have a newspaper, well, we have a few newspapers. One that I tend to read is The Times or The Guardian. And then about this on the weekend, when you look at the top 10 books of the week, I was talking to a friend the other day, the 7 top one was self-help. So it's an industry for that. That's why people are buying and selling. However, nobody's talking about structural issues. There are many things going on. People are not talking, okay, do you want to look at happiness? Look really countries like Finland. What are they doing? I think there also is a book called The Spirit Level by Wicks and Pickett. Talks, equality is better for everyone. When you look at equality, you look at indicators from public health to mental distress to addiction. Wealth distribution is the best way to encounter happiness satisfaction.
Yeah, like what if this self-help wasn't about sitting there in your own mindset and growth, but it was actively going out to help people build homes or help people donate or do activities or volunteer at your local library to read to kids? Like what if that was the self-help? But it wouldn't be talked about as self-help, but that would be self-help, connecting a person to a community. Instead of just saying, stop being sad, just being like, you know what? Look up places where they need more literacy and you can volunteer to read kids. That would elevate one's sense of purpose, happiness, get themselves out of their head, isolation, individualism, actively contribute. It would probably make you happy. Like, especially if you like kids and kids are so funny. I mean, that's just one example that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I think it's from moving from self-help to solidarity. I think in the book I talk about that. We're losing, you become fragmented and we become more individualized and you become, we're not becoming happier with it there. Shall we start shifting? Is there a shift that needs to be moving away from self-help and look mutual aid, looking at how I can support my community, look at solidarity. We're going to put that out there. I don't know how it's going to be received. Maybe join a union. There are many things we can do that brings the solidarity, that brings, the struggles. Because one thing as a community psychologist we talk is that maybe your experience of oppression might be not just yours. Maybe there are other people experiencing there. So how can we together thrive, pursue some form of social change? Can we do that? And the problem with self-help is self-help don't put people together and to try to change their status quo or to try to change their community or the workplace. So it just become fragmented in silos, seeing the new dance on TikTok, but with no real change.
My worry, I guess this is on another acting gig that I did once. It was the season 4 of Deliberations. It was an acting podcast. The season was all about cults and about this woman that joined this cult. And she actually fell into the cult. It was a yoga cult, right? It was like, kind of off the wall, but it was a self-help cult that kind of went wrong. And she wound up like killing her boyfriend who didn't, it was really interesting in the way that we did that podcast as, we'd have one episode with like the acting, right? And then the next episode, we would actually, the creator would bring on a cult specialist. I'm not going to name the cults because I too am worried about getting sued. But there were, they're the standard ones that are out there, but there are these other ones that are like, we're not really know about that really are self-help cults. My danger danger there, Bruno, is some self-help books or communities, or what you want to call it, influencers or et cetera, do offer up the community. And that community has some pretty bad ulterior purposes, and they see a vulnerable individual, they take advantage of that. And I do think that is one of the clearest pathways into a cult.
I didn't
100%.
even think about
Somebody's
that.
got some issues. They're maybe, they don't feel comfortable going to their parents. Maybe the parents were wonderful, maybe they weren't wonderful, but they don't feel comfortable. They go online, or they fall into this thinking or community, and then they're gone. And what was the reason? Well, I wanted to get better. I needed help with this, or I had to do that. There is a danger here. I mean, legitimately, this is not just something that we're talking about, in this lofty academic way. This stuff can lead to very bad things. And yes, that podcast was a fiction podcast, but it was one of the greatest experience that I had ever had, because I just learned so much about the dangers of this. I'm not trying to overemphasize the danger for, clickbait or whatever reasons, but it's something that I'm going to talk to my own kids about someday.
That's like the manosphere, where guys who are lonely and they're incels, and then they're just online, and then they just fuel all of that rage and anger.
We just did an episode on this
Yeah,
about red pill and
yeah.
everything. I mean,
I didn't even think
that's the
about
flip
that.
side to all this.
No, it's a great
Yeah.
question. Like, how do we distinguish? It's the same thing with like the health. How do we distinguish what is a good, what is a genuine or an authentic way to self-help versus somebody who's just profiting or potentially making us worse?
Yes, no, I think it's a great question. Don't join a cult. The idea is you're thinking about solidarity. We talk about communities. We think about neighborhoods. We're talking about workplace. We try to get connected with others. And I think there's a benefit to that. But, it's everything we do to some extent. I think, was Rich there who talks about, we live in a risk society. So, yeah, there are people, especially as I think we talk about the manosphere, that's a big thing now. But I would argue that's more to do with the fragmentation of society. For example, I think the issue here that we're talking about is sometimes how poverty, to some extent, is medicalized. And what we see through the self-help is not, let's help your neighbor. Okay, that would be a great tool. Help your neighbor. Join a union. Go for a run with friends. Call an elderly person. There are things that you can do to bring the sense of community, but there are value that guides us. For example, as a community psychologist, have a value of human rights, understanding diversity, things that binds us together. However, yes, if you are more prone to join a community that it's more likely to be extremist, there is a danger, but it's a danger across society. More dangerous is if we become isolated. We need to get people talking and dialogue, if anything. That dialogical learning, that we have the contrast of ideas is really important. So it's not for people to go out there and become isolated, because there is more of a risk. It's for people to really find solidarity through their communities. If you remember COVID, one thing that really showed us, there are a lot of support groups, especially in the UK. So you have people who are isolated their house for one reason or other, and we came together. I remember, and people coming together. So it's that kind of solidarity that we're talking about. It's the solidarity that, if someone's getting discriminated or experiencing misogyny, we can step up together and to some extent try to challenge that. Is that the kind of solidarity that we're talking about? I think you mentioned, Gwen, about I have a person who needs support, a elderly person. Can I read for that person? Can I read for my toddler's group at school? Is that connection that we are missing? Not isolated in some form of a religious group. I would not advocate for that. I would advocate for human solidarity from the workplace to communities and neighborhoods.
I wonder if it's also like with this manosphere, so much of it is rage against women, people of color. One of the distinguishing factors, let's say, for the cultish behavior is that if the community requires that you isolate yourself from everything that you love, or if it is grounded in some sort of resentment, then maybe that would be problematic, as opposed to a regular yoga club.
Yes, of course. And then it's a real danger here, I think, globally. In the UK, you had big debates about that, especially young men who like the role models in terms of masculinity.
Oh, yeah.
And they need the role model. So you have a lot of debates about that without naming names. So it's through the community that you can find a plurality of people to look and maybe see how we can develop in terms of our solidarity within others. I don't know if you had this series in the US, but you had adolescents.
Yes,
So
yes.
it's okay. So that really shows you the isolation of the young person is fiction, we get, but the isolation really epitomizes there. The parents thought the child was okay playing video games at home. And we're missing there. If you think, as I mentioned, I'm writing another book, in the book's about community psychology, loneliness, and we see the people who are more and more going to the gyms. It's not about going to the gyms, but it's young people who go to the gyms and don't talk to anyone. So we start seeing an increase of loneliness amongst young people who are doing activities but not engaging with anyone else during the day. So when you talk about solidarity, fragmentation, self-help, it's the idea that we have real crises from climate change to AI. They need collective action and decisions, and people come together to dialogue. And what self-help does, and that's what I try to argue, is doesn't bring us together to have contrast views and opinions. As you ask me, okay, Bruno, what do you think about that? We need the dialogical aspect that's missing in society. In self-help book says, work on the self, work on the project. It doesn't say, look, we have problems with AI. It's not that people going to be unemployed. A lot of people going to be unemployable. And that's something that we didn't vote for. There's no democracy. There's no demons, not the participation of the people with those really key issues. So I would say less worrying about self-help, more about, okay, how can we collectively really think about our future, about our planet, about AI, about climate change, about democracy?
Let's wrap up. Can I ask you, maybe this is a little bit snooty of me, but I just have to know. Is there a particular book or popular wave right now that just, as a PhD, that just gets on your nerves? I want to know if there is something out there. You don't have to name names, but or maybe you can if you want to, but is there some sort of a pop psychology fad of self-help world that you're just thinking, come on?
Yeah, I think it's the idea of flourishing and be yourself. Why? Because the idea of flourishing negates that life is very complex. What does it mean to flourish? Flourish how? Is that getting a great job, a six-figure salary? Is that what flourish means? Does flourish means, don't know, get involved in my community? What does a flourish mean? The other one, be yourself. What that means. Imagine talking to young Adolf Hitler and say, be yourself. This idea is very problematic. I think we need the challenge. We need the critique. We need the critical frame. We need the dialogical aspects of participation that self-help doesn't bring. So those kind of fads gets to my nerve, especially be happy and good vibes. Well, I think you mentioned, Rudy, when you think about philosophers, right, we think people with deep melancholy, people really thinking about what does it mean. They, I would argue, achieve great things. So if you think about that, Abraham Lincoln, one of your presidents, he regarded as a great president, experienced deep melancholy. And that's part of human experience. They were medicalizing, putting aside. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to sometimes say, I didn't have a great day. I don't need to be striving towards anything. I'm a human. I don't need to be pursuing a project that's dictator ideologically to me to do well, to succeed, to be better, to compete. And more competition fragments our society. That's what I would argue. Plenty of other things that really get into my nerves, but I think those things about being happy, be yourself, and flourishing is the thing that I would critique.
I am very pleased that we talked about this topic. And I think
it's
that,
good.
yeah, it really made me not to personalize everything, but I've avoided watching Adolescence. My wife and I keep talking about it. I think I'm too scared to watch it. Bruno, I don't know. Do you think there's tips in that for parents? I mean, it sounds like the overarching thing, the parents everything seems fine. Is one of the themes of it telling parents, you really got to be more involved in your kids' lives. You really need to get to know your kids. You really need to make sure they're okay. Sorry if I'm simplifying things. I'm just curious.
I remember watching that with my wife. My son's very young, he's 3 and a bit. But we have those conversations, really. We talk about the crisis of masculinity. It, to some extent, allows you to approach a topic between your partner and your child that's needed. I rather have the conversation with my child than something happened I did not have the conversation. Because if you watch the series, that's something that, although it's fictional, but a lot of people experiencing that. It's the isolation. I thought my child was safe. I really thought it. But no, your child is being groomed through thoroughly very misogynistic views and ideas. They are perpetuated without no challenge. So as a parent, I rather challenge that and say, actually, not all men are like that and not should be like that. They shouldn't. That's just wrong. And so I think that's really important. So if my child was a young person or a teen, I would sit down and watch with him to have that conversation. I remember I was talking to a colleague, also an academic dynamic. Said, I sat down and we watched together, my child as a teen, and you have these conversations about what's not okay. Because let's face it, Rudy, if you're not having a conversation, your child will have the conversation at school or the walkway or the club or the park. So that conversation will happen. Rather, you voice your opinion.
What it is I can't be afraid. You got to know what's out there. And if you care, and if you plan on nipping any of that bad influence in the bud, you got to get on it early. And so, no, it's good advice, Bruno. I appreciate it.
It's good for daughters as well. Even though it's talking about the man's behavior, I would also want it for the safety for daughters to be able to identify these problematic features, and that the young girls are not also buying into the idea that this is what a man is. Another way is to also just promote and show masculine behavior that is good. So for example, like after the Dodgers won, the coach just saying, in a locker full of dudes, right? A locker room full of men, they're shirtless, they're throwing the champagne, and this coach is saying, I love you guys. And he even said to Rojas, he said, the game honored you. It was true leadership. Whereas this idea about masculinity is about dominance. And then you could see true leadership. And I think that promoting that this is what a man does is able to say to the team, celebrate and say, I love you in that vulnerable way. Just elevate every single person in the room and also the opposing team. Thank the opposing team for their hard work, for making that game possible. When I saw that, I've been thinking about that, about what masculinity looks like. We can't only say, don't do this, but we should really highlight when it's true, when it's authentic, when it's about being virtuous, when it's about being a leader, when it's about protecting and being kind and being generous. It's not about dominating.
That's the way to end, because you just summarize some of the points I make on the book at the end, really. When the coach goes and say, I love you, folks. It's really about solidarity, isn't it? It's about being the teams, being together, and those levels of vulnerability, or not trying to hustle or try to win or try to compete. He said, you know what? Thank you for the experience of being together and achieve something together. And bear in mind, we won, but we would not have done this without the opposition who lost. So even there, you need the solidarity. I think it's a fantastic way of summarizing.
Well, thank you, Bruno. You just made my day. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the opportunity. Brilliant. Thank you.
We appreciate it. We love having colleagues and friends overseas. So make sure you go tell everybody in the UK that you were. I was just on this great American podcast.
I will.
Just lost for a lawyer.
Good is in the Details is produced by Dr. Gwendolyn Dolske and Rudy Salo. Be sure to check out our Patreon for extra content. And I'll also put a link to our new book, Interview with Intention. If you fancy starting your own podcast, this is a great book for you of how do you navigate those interviews? How do you get the best questions and the best answers from your guests? Don't forget to rate and review our podcast on either Spotify or Apple. It really, really helps us with the algorithm, and we appreciate it so much. If you enjoyed this episode or any other episode, take a screenshot and tag us on Instagram at goodisinthedetailspod. You can also get in touch, goodisinthedetailspod@gmail.com, or our website, goodisinthedetails.com. Okay, until next time.